needed to have 2 steel rods put inside my back to save my life. And they said, if you don't do this surgery, you're not going to live. So, do you think I was happy to get that news? I was very upset, and I would cry a lot in my prayers, and I would keep asking God, why are you doing this to me? This isn't fair. I don't want rods in my back, and I don't want to go through all of this pain. Well, a lot of good Christian people heard that I was going to have surgery, people that I didn't even know, and they started sending me cards and letters trying to encourage me. And I got one very special card where someone wrote a verse for me, and that verse has become my favorite verse. It's 2 Corinthians 12, 9, and 10. And in these verses, there's a missionary, an apostle named Paul, and he wrote these verses. He said that he had a physical problem too. And 3 times Paul begged God, please take this problem away from me. And God said to Paul, I am not going to take the problem away. You're going to have it your whole life. But I'm going to give you the grace that you need. So Paul's answer was no, just like when I prayed to God and I used to say, please make me well, God has said to me, no. But he gave me the same promise that he gave to Paul. He said, I'll give you grace. So when Paul heard no as an answer, he said, I am going to rejoice in the Lord. Because when I'm weak, when I'm going through hard times, when I'm suffering, then I can see how strong God is, because God is with me. So I started to think about how God was with Paul. And Paul did a lot of very great things. He traveled all over the world, and God used him in a mighty way, even though he had a physical problem. He had a lot of challenges in his life, but he still rejoiced. So I started to think about Paul, and I determined that I wanted my attitude to be the same as Paul's. I will rejoice in the suffering that God allows me to face, because as I'm suffering, as I face weakness, I learn to depend on God more. And God lets a lot of us go through difficult times. I'm the only one here today in a wheelchair, but there are difficult circumstances that you face too. Sometimes you'll face sadness in your life and challenges, and you might think that God has forgotten you, or that because your situation is so difficult, God can't use you. But that's not what the Bible tells us. The Bible says God is always with us. Nothing is impossible for him, and his grace is sufficient. So I hope that will encourage you today too. Whatever you're going through, remember that God is there, and his grace is wonderful. So do you want to know how I ended up in India? Well, I'm going to show you a video in a couple minutes so you can see pictures. But I continued to pray. After I had that surgery, I prayed and prayed and prayed for Asia. And the more I prayed, the more I wanted God to send me there. And after I finished college, someone in my church came to me and said that they would buy a plane ticket for me so that I could go to India and visit a missionary. And I was so excited that God provided the money for me to go. So on my very first trip to India, my parents went with me, and we went to South India. Do you like geography?
Yeah.
Okay, India is shaped like a triangle. So the first time I went to India, I was on the very tip of India. And I went to visit a missionary, and he showed me his church, and he has a Bible college. And we saw some other missionaries, and they took us to villages, And to every village we went, I would share my testimony, just as I have shared with you. I would talk about how I came to know the Lord and how God has been so good to me. And there is one thing very interesting about India that you should know. India, their main religion is Hinduism. That means they have millions of gods. Can you imagine?